I spend a lot of time on TikTok because, like I said, at my work, there's a lot of downtime. And it's good for the ADHD brain, just being able to swipe from one video to the next. And I end up on the left side of politics TikTok a lot, on a lot of progressive content creators and a lot of leftist content creators. Their content comes up on my feed, and there is a common theme that I'm seeing with a bunch of different left-wing creators on TikTok and Twitter, and it's starting to bleed its way over onto YouTube, which is part of the reason why I wanted to hop back into the game, as it were, was to kind of speak my mind about the problem of anti-electoralism in particularly with American leftists. The problem with anti-electoralism is a lot of people on the left don't want to vote for the blue team because the blue team isn't progressive. They're not. They're right-leaning centrist at best, except for a couple of them like AOC, Ilhan Omar, and obviously Bernie Sanders, whom we all love. They're left-leaning centrist, especially on a world stage, and especially compared to many of us, like myself. I'm a socialist. They don't represent me, but they do a hell of a lot better of a job representing me than the Republicans do, than the red team does. And so a lot of people on the left, they don't want to vote blue. There were a lot of Bernie or busters that flat out refused to vote for Biden in 2020, which was insane, especially after the shenanigans that Donald Trump had been doing for the previous 4 years and then continued doing. A month after the election was over, do we not remember January 6th? And yet those people still stick to, I'm glad I didn't vote for Biden. Why? Biden doesn't speak for us. He's not doing anything for us, and arguably he's not doing anything for the country. But he's not attacking us. The thing about American politics is there are only two teams. There's only two teams in all of American politics. There's the red team and there's the blue team. And you have to pick one. Now, some people will say, oh, what about the Libertarian Party? What about the Green Party? What about the Socialist Party? They're not politically relevant in America. They're simply not. If you look at electoral data and voting data from the past 30 years, as long as I've been alive, no third-party candidate has gotten more than 2% of the vote, in the popular vote at least, in any federal election. Third-party voting is not viable in America because we don't have ranked choice voting. We have first past the post voting. So whoever gets the most votes wins. The problem I have with people on the left voting third party is by not voting for the team that's not doing anything for us, by not voting for the blue team, you are making it that much easier for open fascists, white nationalists, and Nazis to gain power on a federal level. Not to mention down ballot voting, but on a federal level. Republicans being in power is infinitely worse than Democrats being in power, especially for leftists, especially for socialists, communists, anarchists, what have you. For us, Democrats being in power is infinitely better than the Republicans being in power. But leftists refuse to accept that because the Democrats and the Republicans are the same to me. Anti-electoralist leftists are the rational centrists meme to me, where they can look at both sides, the red team wanting to take away women's rights, take away civil rights, and commit active violence against the LGBT community, and being open about it, and the blue team that just, well, we don't really have the votes and it won't help us campaign next year if we pass things like voting rights or universal health care, things like that, codify Roe into law. So they're just not doing the good things, whereas you have the red team that is actively doing bad things and being very successful at it. And they'll look at those and say that they're the same. They will look at the Democrats and the Republican Party and say they are the same to them when they're objectively not. The blue team doesn't help us, but the red team is trying to kill us in a multitude of different ways. They're stripping us of our rights one by one. Roe v. Wade just fell. That's going to make it incredibly dangerous and difficult for people who want to have children, like myself and my wife, to have more safely. My wife has health issues that make pregnancy and even conceiving incredibly difficult and very dangerous. Just last year, my wife had an ectopic pregnancy and needed to have an abortion to save her life. If we were living in a red state and it happened this year, my wife would be dead right now. And yes, a lot of people will point at these trigger laws in these states and say, well, there's nothing in the law saying they can't treat for ectopic pregnancy. There's nothing in those laws saying that they can. And a lot of doctors are hesitating or not treating patients with ectopic pregnancies or partial miscarriages or full miscarriages that the body hasn't evacuated, and allowing those women to suffer and in some cases die because they're waiting on a response from their legal department so that they don't go to jail. And women that do need those services, whether it's for, oops, my birth control failed, or the fetus inside of me is trying to kill me, or is going to kill me, those women now lost the right to have bodily autonomy, and in some cases, save their own lives. There was a case in Ohio of a 10-year-old SA victim, a 10-year-old rape victim, that had to go to Indiana to get an abortion because she was raped and impregnated. And you know what the Republicans are doing? They're investigating the doctor in Indiana that performed the abortion on a 10-year-old that had been sexually assaulted and impregnated. A 10-year-old. How the fuck is a 10-year-old supposed to give birth? Yet they call themselves pro-life. And in the opinion that was released by SCOTUS, they said that they wanted to re-examine Obergefell versus Hodges, which is gay marriage. They wanted to re-examine Lawrence v. Texas, which is anti-sodomy laws. If those two Supreme Court statutes go away or get overruled, it will be illegal to be gay or lesbian or queer or what have you in the United States. Because anti-sodomy laws basically make it so that it's illegal to have any type of intercourse that's not straight penis vagina sex. It does. Now, I don't think the cops or the GOP are going to want to enforce anti-sodomy laws when it comes to their wives performing oral or letting them, knock on the back door. But when it comes to a gay couple, absolutely. When it comes to a lesbian couple, absolutely. They're trying to make it illegal to be gay in America. That's their goal. Ted Cruz even recently just said that the Supreme Court was wrong in their decision in Obergefell v. Hodges. The Republicans are trying to take away your rights. Another one, interracial marriage. Loving versus Virginia. The one that allows Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court justice who drafted the opinion, to remain married to his white wife. They want to re-examine that. They're attacking voting rights with voter ID laws in southern states that are targeting people of color, specifically looking for the IDs that most commonly are possessed by them, and ruling out those IDs so that they can't use those to vote, making it more difficult for non-white people to vote on purpose. Or mail-in voting. They're wanting to ban mail-in voting in several states. In Texas in 2020, they had one ballot drop-off box. The GOP decided one ballot drop-off box per county. That means a county in bumfuck nowhere with 1,000 people in it had the same number of ballot drop-off boxes as Austin, Texas, that has over a million people living in it. Same number, to make it difficult for blue voters who live in big cities to be able to cast their vote, so that Texas doesn't flip blue, because they know that if everyone in Texas that was legally able to vote was able to vote and had their vote counted, Texas would be a blue state overnight. If everyone in 2024, let's say, if everyone in Texas that is legally able to vote casts their vote in Texas, Texas would be blue. They're trying to prevent them from doing that. Speaking of voter laws, another ramification of Roe v. Wade being overturned is a woman's right to vote is come into question, because if you're a woman in these states and you get an abortion, or if you go to another state to obtain that abortion and you go back home, you'll be charged with murder, which is a felony. And felonies take away your right to vote. You see, the GOP knows that they're not going to be able to get, the 14th Amendment overturned. They're not. They know they're not going to be able to get it overturned, because they would need to ratify it with 2/3 of states, and 2/3 of states are not going to vote for that. So what do? They implement roadblocks along the way to prevent women from being able to vote, because women, with the exception of white women, vote overwhelmingly blue. And even most white women, nearly half, I should say, of white women vote blue. So if women can't vote, there goes a fuck ton of of blue voters. And if only white people can vote, there goes a fuck ton more. They're trying to make it so that only straight white men are able to vote. Because if you're gay and they take away the protections for anti-sodomy laws, sodomy in some states, I believe on the books, is a felony. There goes your right to vote. Who do gay people overwhelmingly vote for? The blue team. They're trying to make it so you can't vote to keep them out of power. And they're doing it at an alarming rate. The only way to stop them is to put people in that won't do those things. Even if they're not going to help us, they won't do the bad thing. What else what is the GOP coming for? The rights of parents and children and their doctors to make medical decisions. We're talking about trans kids. For some reason, the GOP has pushed this talking point that if your kid is trans, all you got to do is go to the doctor and be like, "Little Timmy, he's been playing with Barbies," and boom, they'll put you on fucking HRT and get you top and bottom surgery next month, which is not the case. Nobody under the age of 18, with the exception of extreme fringe cases, is receiving any sort of gender confirmation surgery under the age of 18. By and large, at least until the age of 16, all they'll get is puberty blockers, which if they decide later on, which is incredibly rare, that they actually aren't trans and oopsie doodles, I'm cis, they just go off of that and start puberty late. No ill effects. It's negligible. But they've convinced their constituency that that's what's going to happen, that kids are just gonna, a girl's gonna start playing with cars, and next thing you know, boom, they're a boy now, which isn't true. So there are several states that have already passed laws, like Idaho. I believe it's Idaho. I'd have to look into that, but Idaho, I believe, just passed a law banning any sort of trans-affirming health care for anyone under the age of 18, and to disencourage and disincentivize parents from just socially transitioning their children, which isn't it's not permanent. It's not a medical procedure. It's just calling them by their preferred pronouns, calling them by their preferred name, referring to them by their preferred gender. States are trying to ban that. There's even a bill that was thankfully not passed, that was submitted in, I think, Ohio, that was trying to ban all trans affirmative care, even for adults. They don't want you being able to, you and your children and your children's doctor, your pediatrician, from being, they're trying to stop them from making medical decisions. The Democrats aren't doing that. The Democrats aren't doing anything to protect that, but they're not attacking that. But they're the same, right? What about education? Which party is the one that wants to defund education, swap it over to private schools so that only the rich kids can get a decent education because poor kids can't afford to go to a private school? Even with school choice vouchers, it's not enough to pay for tuition at a private school. And if there are no public schools, well, it looks like the poor kids, predominantly children of color, don't get to have an education. The Democrats and the Republicans, they're not the same. And so many leftists, people who call themselves leftists, I suppose, try to say that they are. And my response to them is, sure, the blue team isn't helping us, but vote for them anyway because it just takes an afternoon or 20 minutes filling out your mail-in ballot, and then you can go back to activism. But vote for them, because the red team is the other team, the only other option, and if you don't vote blue, red will win. Especially without your vote, depending on what state you live in. Right now we're in the middle of a waiting game. The game that we're playing is we are waiting for the boomers to die off, particularly the boomers in power. Blue team, Democrat, millennial politicians like AOC and Ilhan Omar are rather progressive. They are different than the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers and the Joe Bidens of previous generations. They're not the same politicians. Ilhan Omar and AOC are very active, very vocal, and push very hard for progressive policies. Is it going anywhere? No. Because the boomer politicians are standing in their way. But they don't have much time left. We've already seen, at least on the Democratic side, on the left, elected politicians on the left from newer generations, millennials and onward, when they get into power, they actually do shit to help people, or at least try. Sure, right now they've got the boomer politicians standing in their way, but what's going to happen when Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and all of the other boomer Democrats aren't in the way? If we can fill Congress in 10 or 15 years, if we have that long, with millennial and potentially Gen Z politicians that are progressive minded and are willing to vote for things like universal health care, universal basic services, universal housing, universal basic income, voting rights, codifying Roe v. Wade into law, codifying gay marriage and interracial marriage into law rather than just having it relying on Supreme Court precedent, you will see change in a positive direction. It sucks, I know. Right now we're playing a big old waiting game, waiting for the boomers to die off, but it's already starting to happen. We're already starting to see boomer politicians, socialites, and media personalities from the boomer generation hopping into their grave with both feet. And it's happening more and more. More and more of them are not waking up in the morning because they're old. This is not me wishing death on them. They're just old. They are. They are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Life expectancy is, 79, I think, right now? We don't have that much longer to wait. And I understand we don't have that much longer left, especially when it comes to climate change. But the more and more of them on the blue team that die off, the more and more of them we can replace with millennial and Gen Z politicians that want what we want. Millennials and Gen Z are by far the most progressive generation to date. And we need them in power. But we need the boomers to die off. Both the politicians and the voters, because it's the boomer voters that are keeping the boomer politicians in power. It's the boomer voters that are keeping the GOP relevant. Look around at people you know in your age group. How many of them have you met that are hardcore right-wingers? They are out there, but they are not the majority by any means. From both the millennial and particularly the Gen Z generation, it is an overwhelmingly progressive generation. Both of them are. We're not going to be seeing a blue Senate and a blue House, and probably not, or I'm sorry, we're not going to be seeing a red Senate or a red House of Representatives or even a red team president in a decade, I'd say, because the majority of people that vote red are boomers. They're not going to last very long. And the majority of politicians that are either doing nothing or, if they're on the red team, actively hurting us, they're Republicans. Stop pushing this narrative that we don't need to vote. Voting does nothing. Democrats and Republicans, they're the same to me. If someone is chasing you down the street with a knife and the person across the street doesn't help you, who is more of a threat and who is more morally culpable for any injuries or death that you sustain? I know there are some people that are going to stick to their guns and argue in bad faith and say they're both just as bad, but deep down we both know the person chasing you with the knife is worse for you, is more of a threat, more morally culpable for your injuries and or death than the person on the other side of the street that didn't do anything about it. The Republican Party is the person with the knife. The person on the other side of the street, that's the Democratic Party, at least for now. Please vote blue. It is an afternoon. And then you can go back to doing all of the progressive action, all of the organizing, all of the activism that you already do the other 364 days out of the year. Just one day, election day, each year, you need to vote, hold your nose and vote blue. And then the next day, you can start shitting on the blue team all you want. But vote for them. I voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Then the day after election day, I was being like, all right, Joe, what are you going to do? Your track record doesn't speak well for you. You better do this, this, and this. I'm going to be disappointed if you don't. And he hasn't. And I would say that I've kept him honest about it, but I'm one motherfucker in the middle of nowhere, America. He doesn't know who I am. But I've been vocal about it. I've been vocal about my disapproval of his administration, but I'm also realistic in the fact that he's better than Trump. He is. He is. Biden, for as useless and spineless as he is better than Trump. And if you need any more evidence, just look at January 6th. Watch the January 6th Commission's proceedings and all of the evidence that they've dug up. But look at January 6th. That's what Trump did. Biden couldn't do that. Biden could not make that happen. He could not try and stage a fascistic takeover of our democratic process. He couldn't, and he wouldn't. And if for no other reason, he's better than Trump. Trump tried to undermine our institutions in more ways than one. Biden's not doing that. We need to hold our nose and vote blue instead of just looking at them and saying neither of them represent me, so they're both the same, even though you know they're not.